If you remember, I mentioned that 67 in the Six-Day War, Israel took all the land effectively, confiscated it, which meant that Egypt had lost control of the Sinai and Gaza was taken from them, which meant that Lebanon had lost control of, Syria had lost control of the Golan Heights in the north, which also meant that Jordan had lost control of the West Bank. So what that resulted in was the military units, the guerrilla army in Palestine had to leave the territory altogether. They had to go into exile. Some went to Egypt and would continue their operations from Egypt into Israel. Others went to Jordan. And from Jordan, they would launch attacks into West Bank. Okay, at the head of that organization, the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, was Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat. And he had a group of Fedayeen. Fedayeen were like military mercenaries. Not mercenaries, but they were military guerrillas. They were army it was a guerrilla unit effectively. Okay, so they were willing to die for the cause. And as a part of their campaign, they would also hijack planes, set bombs, assassinate leaders of states. It was a full guerrilla warfare. But they operated from Egypt and from Jordan primarily. And that was a problem, because as they sent missiles into Israel from Egypt, Israel was now pushing towards Egyptian borders and seeking to effectively also take that region, because you're allowing them to attack us from your borders. So Egypt becomes basically endangered from that region. They have to get rid of these people, otherwise they're going to invite upon Egypt an invasion. Likewise, in Jordan, the king of Jordan at the time was Hussein, King Hussein, very young man, and he had taken in many Palestinians. So what used to be West Bank is now part of Israel. So all of those people have to move into the East Bank, which is now Jordan. And he kept them in these massive refugee camps. And the population there was effectively growing by the day as people left Israel into Jordan. The problem is, however, amongst these people, there were PLO members. And they were operating from within the camps in those regions, sending rockets into Israel in the West Bank. And Israel used that as an opportunity to strike and to counter and to go against Jordan. So that put the Jordanian king under very difficult situations, because he cannot just leave the population to themselves in the West Bank. He's giving them a space to stay. But at the same time, his own nation is now going to be under fire and could potentially be invaded by Israel because of these rockets going out from his territory into Israel. Furthermore, there's another problem, because Yasser Arafat and the PLO were very politicized. They were very politicized. In fact, for example, Abdullah Azzam, Dr. Abdullah Azzam, was known as the godfather of jihad. He used to be a part of this resistance when they were in these regions, Egypt and Jordan. But he left. He left because he said that this was not for the sake of Allah, it was nationalism. It was a nationalist movement. And so he couldn't fight under those terms. He left. And he went to Saudi Arabia, where he became a lecturer. And eventually he went to Afghanistan, where he found the real jihad. And he died in Afghanistan. But he left the PLO. Likewise, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, rahimahullah, in the early phases was against the PLO as well. He considered them a secular movement, like a Marxist movement, an Arab Marxist movement, by any means necessary. So kidnapping, bombs, terrorist attacks, it was all allowed for them. He renounced all of that. This is not Islamic, it's not an Islamic movement, which eventually becomes, he creates another movement, which is Islamically inspired Hamas. That's how they come about, as a counter to the PLO. And the Israelis also financed in the early phases some of these operations against the PLO. That's a very convoluted story, but it is history, whether we like it or not. So Yasser Arafat is operating in these regions bordering what is now Israel. But when he's actually in Jordan, the problem is his organization becomes a government within a government. So his operations from the camps in Jordan they begin to challenge the Jordanian authorities. There was even, in fact, an assassination attempt on the king himself from the PLO. So when that begins to happen, King Hussein is now worried. I have a problem in my hands. I need to do something. If I don't do anything, they're going to take over my country. So the PLO takes over my country. They've already tried to kill him. But also I've got the other threat of Israel also bombing us. So I have double threats. So I need to do something. So he decides to go and attack and crush the PLO in these camps. Now, in the process of doing that, many thousands of Palestinians are killed. Thousands of Palestinian refugees were massacred by King Hussein of Jordan. But in doing so, he needed help. So from 67, so let's go back a bit. So following the 6-Day War, Jordan was crushed. They lost the West Bank, and he needed to find a way to recover. He brought in help from Pakistan. He brought in military advisors and military support from Pakistan. A general known as 𝗖𝙁𝗢𝗓 was sent from 67 all the way to 70, Black September. Right? He was in Jordan and he was advising King Hussein. This is a declassified document on the CIA website. I've downloaded it for you. You can read it for your own selves in your own time. It's a fact, it's established. 𝗖𝙁𝗢𝗓 was an advisor to King Hussein between 67, when they lost the war against Israel, to 1970 in the events of Black September. And for his participation in killing up to 12,000 Palestinians. Look at the history of that. Go back to 1970 and look at what happened to the Palestinians in Jordan, in the camps, with the support of Jordan, but also the expert advice and participation of 𝗖𝙁𝗢𝗓. So that information is available on the CIA website. I've downloaded it for you. You can download it, read it for yourselves. Don't take my word for it. But it was a very difficult situation because, look, King Hussein was between a rock and a hard place. Yasser Arafat, wherever he went, he brought with him the struggle. So that meant if he was in Egypt, Egyptian borders were now utilized as a battlefront against Israel, which means Israel would turn towards Egypt. When they kicked out of Egypt, they go to Jordan. This is the military unit I'm talking about, PLO. And from Jordan, they start also attacking. So Jordanian borders become a battleground into Israel. Furthermore, they were seeking to undermine the Jordanian king who welcomed them into the country. They even tried to kill him. It's not wisdom, right? So he has no choice in his. I'm not justifying the massacre whatsoever, but he has to take action. So he decides to go in and crush the PLO. Thousands die. When he does that, the PLO is now expelled from Jordan, expelled from Egypt, expelled from Jordan. They go to Lebanon. In 1975, another civil war breaks out in Lebanon, and the PLO is also in the center of that conflict. Now, there was already tension in Lebanon because Lebanon is the Arab version of Israel. Israel was created by the British. Lebanon was created by the French. They have the same purpose. Lebanon was created with an equal distribution of Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Druze, 25% each roughly. But it was always to be under the Maronite Christians. Only a Christian president could rule the country. That's how the country was set up. So there was already tension amongst the Christians and the Muslims anyway. And amongst the Muslims, there were Shia Muslims, that's why you have Hezbollah, and Sunni Muslims. So the grounds were already very, 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 very sensitive. So now you add the PLO to that mix, you have a civil war. And so people are looking at the pattern here. Wherever the PLO goes, you have problems.
On top of the royal palace in Amman, the national flag blows fitfully in the breeze, symbolic perhaps of King Hussein's faltering rule over his stricken and divided country. Last week, the king approved the formation of a new cabinet, 8 of whose members are Palestinians who actively support the aims of Arab guerrilla organizations in Jordan. It was the latest in a long line of concessions which the king's been forced to make to the guerrillas in face of their increasing power and influence within the state. On 2 occasions in the last 6 months, Jordan's been brought to the verge of civil war as guerrilla troops and units of the Jordanian army have clashed in the streets of Amman. The Palestine guerrilla movement sprang up in the wake of the Arabs' crushing defeat in the Six-Day War, when the West Bank of the Jordan was lost to Israel. There are now a dozen separate organizations dedicated to the overthrow of Israel by armed force and the restoration of a Palestine state. Most of them are left-wing, and Mao Zedong's handbook on guerrilla warfare is compulsory reading for old and young alike. The most powerful of all the resistance groups is Al-Fatah, with a membership of about 10,000. In its elaborate training sessions arranged for new recruits, even the very young soon get acquainted with the realities of war. Over the last few years, Arafat's built up the military strength of Al-Fatah to a point where it compares favorably with regular armies of some Arab states. The fully trained guerrillas know how to use the latest Russian arms. Good. Besides the Kalashnikov submachine gun, the guerrillas also have Katyusha rockets and modern transport and communications systems. The guerrillas draw their support from the thousands of Palestinians who were driven from the West Bank during the war and who now live in huge refugee camps in Jordan. There are frustrated people who've lost faith in the methods and abilities of Arab governments, and for whom the guerrillas' doctrine of armed conflict with Israel has an understandable appeal. The guerrillas have set up their own administration in the camps, which are now in effect a state within a state. This open flaunting of Jordanian authority led to a crisis in February when the guerrillas refused to comply with government security measures banning the carrying of arms in public. When Arafat and Hussein finally came to an agreement, it was the king who had to give way. To preserve peace in the streets of Amman, the king ordered the withdrawal of all the security measures. In return, Arafat agreed that the guerrillas would be more discreet in their activities and promised to exercise a greater degree of discipline over them. With this compromise in force, Amman returned to normal, but it was clear to all objective observers that King Hussein was now unable to exert his authority over the Palestinians, who accounted for half of Jordan's population. For 4 months, the guerrillas and the Jordanian government succeeded in coexisting, and at the beginning of June, contingents from both sides joined together in a peaceful demonstration to mark the 3rd anniversary of the Six-Day War. It was an alliance that proved impossible to maintain because of the activities of extremists on both sides. When a shooting incident between guerrillas and Jordanian special forces took place in a northern suburb of Amman, the whole city was quickly engulfed by fierce fighting. As the battle raged, troops of the extreme left-wing Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine held 40 foreigners hostage in the Intercontinental Hotel, which they threatened to blow up unless the government agreed to the chaos. Came yet another compromise between Arafat and King Hussein. The guerrilla leader claimed he didn't want the overthrow of the monarchy in Jordan, as this could only lead to anarchy in which the ultimate aim of Palestine liberation might well be lost sight of. But he was in no doubt that the guerrillas had prevented the Jordanian army from taking Amman.
I can assure you that our fighters and myself, playing my little role with them, have been able to face the tanks and prevent it from penetrating or entering in the capital.
As leader of the guerrillas, Arafat's problem is similar to King Hussein's. Both men have to control extremists in their own ranks. One such man on the guerrilla side is Nayef Hawatmeh, leader of a splinter group known as the Democratic Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, an extreme Marxist organization that believes revolution in the Arab countries is just as important as war against Israel. King Hussein has no doubt told his fellow rulers that if they refuse to support him now and let the guerrillas take over Jordan, they'll pay the same price themselves later on. The growing power of the guerrillas could be the spur that forces Iraq and Syria to set up an effective joint command that will pose a real military threat to Israel. If this happens, the guerrillas' appeal would be less attractive. If it doesn't, King Hussein will have to decide whether to crush the guerrillas once and for all or abdicate all authority to them. At a recent press conference, he didn't seem prepared to give in.
Regarding the resistance, It could never survive without the support of the people, without the support of the army. And in these two areas, wedges were driven. I am firmly convinced that what has happened is not an accident. And as I've said, my position during these last few days has been that of a person walking in a minefield. I've done my utmost to prevent the complete destruction of everything I built, of everything I love, of my life, in fact. If I'm unable to organize and mobilize all the resources of my people, I believe they are with me in this aim and towards our common objectives. And I'm not the type of person who can quit. This nation is a part of me and I'm a part of it, and so is my family. We've always fought its battles, and we'll do so to the end.
Yeah. But this issue of Black September is extremely important. It's extremely important. It's extremely important. And the complicity of another Muslim nation, Pakistan, it has to be brought up. I'm sorry. If I offend you, it has to be brought up. We are also part of the problem. We are also part of the problem. Right? Well, that is to say, not to pick on anyone, but we need to also look at the broader picture. It's far too easy to just say the Arabs. Saudi for everything. Saudi for everything. Saudi. Or Iran. But this problem was a community problem. It was something that was created by the entire community. Because when the Brits entered Jerusalem, and Allenby seized Jerusalem, he was accompanied by Muslims in his army. It was also from the Indo-Pak region, subcontinent. They were in his army. But also he had Muslims from Sudan. You had Muslims from Egypt. You had the army and the supporters and those who worked with the Sharif of Mecca. They were also part of that December 11th when they entered and seized Jerusalem, symbolically seized Jerusalem. 1 week before the Balfour Declaration is given and is announced, and Israel is now something that is a project open for the Zionists to take hold of. Muslims were also complicit. So we need to tell that story as well. Right? So it's too easy to pigeonhole and just say this nation did it, Saudi did it, or the Iran did it, or Egypt did it. No, we all did it. Let's acknowledge all of that first, and then we can talk about solutions. Yeah.